Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Sarah Coles. I'm the Executive Director of Texas Children in Nature Network. We work very closely with the Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative in 3 of our cities in Texas. And so we are very excited to bring you today's webinar on creating nature-filled cities for our children in Texas. And in just a moment, I'm going to hand it over to Monica Lopez-McGee, who's with the Children in Nature Network. But first, just a couple housekeeping things. I would ask, unless you're one of our presenters, to keep your camera off and yourself on mute, just so that we can make sure we've got good bandwidth and good quality for this presentation today. Also, closed captioning is available. I'll put the directions for that in the chat in just a moment. And we are recording today's webinar, so it will be available on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days. And I will send everyone who registered for today that link so they'll be able to see it. And then please feel free to share that with anyone who wasn't able to make it today. I am going to start with our land acknowledgement. So I am currently working in Austin, and as such, I'm on the ancestral and unceded land of the Tonkawa, Cherokee, and Sauna people. Our ongoing colonial presence on Indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. The work we do through the Texas Children in Nature Network is one small step towards that effort. I'm also going to put a couple of resources in the chat, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Monica.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sarah. And this Monica Lopez-McGee. I'm here in Austin, Texas, but representing our national initiative of the Cities Connecting Children to Nature partnership between the Children in Nature Network and the National League of Cities. And this initiative was started a little over 6 years ago. And when we think of connection to nature, and we know that we have many advocates in this virtual room, we often think of nature as, somewhere immersive. We kind of get taken away even when we close our eyes and imagine nature. And it most certainly is that opportunity. And we recognize that, over 80% of people live in urban centers. So what is the opportunity to connect with nature in our daily lives on a regular basis in our cities and in our communities? And that's what this initiative is about, is bringing together grassroots, the wonderful and amazing grassroots movement that has occurred around children nature, and coupling that with city leadership and city momentum for how we find the levers of change to create new policies, build new partnerships, new practices that can help move and create equitable access to nature for all children across all of our cities. And so with that, when we think of equitable access to nature, we know that too often the race, zip codes, our ethnicities, and our socioeconomic levels dictate children's experience and children and families' experience and access to the outdoors. And this initiative seeks to take a look at how we can shift that. And to date, we have over 18 cities who have participated, and Texas being Texas, we have a stronghold. And so here in Texas, the only state, partly attributed to the wonderful Texas Children in Nature, the wonderful work of the Texas Children in Nature and the partnership that they have created and the collaboratives that they have built across the state. But we have 3 cities from Texas participating in the initiative. And don't be fooled, that is not the norm. So we have Austin, Texas, San Antonio, and Houston. And so I am joined with some amazing colleagues today representing those various cities. And I'm going to turn it over to them for some introductions of themselves, and then we'll get started on some of the questions. This will be really informal. It'll be a conversation. And so please pipe in on the chat box and with questions, and we'll also leave time towards the end of the session to answer questions. And particularly as you go about the session, keeping in mind, like, what would this look like in your city? What might be the support you would need to create an initiative like this in your city, and or who might be the partners to start thinking about? So with that, I'll turn it over to Melody, and Melody, you can kind of tag the next person.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Melody Alcazar, and I coordinate the Cities Connecting Children to Nature initiative for the city of Austin. I'm housed in the Parks and Rec Department in the Planning Division. And I will toss it over to my colleagues in Houston.
Thank you, Melody. I love, I'm going to go first. I see Jaime just joined. So Jaime, you get to wrap up after me. I am blessed to be a native Texan and born and raised in Austin. So it's so much fun to see my hometown, both the Parks and Recreation and the city of Houston and ISD. I grew up in Austin Independent School Districts and went to Austin Parks. Have been in Houston now for over 30 years, but I'm actually a little bit of an anomaly. My company is Healthy Tweaks, but I have been part of the Texas Children in Nature initiative. So I was regional lead to bring in every kid in a park here to Houston, as well as the city's Connecting Children to Nature. And one of our strengths, in addition to our city being connected, the mayor's office being connected, is our amazing parks and nonprofits. We have over 100 nonprofit organizations in the city, and they all work together to get our kids out in nature.
Hello, everybody. I have somebody working at the house today, so I have a mask on. My name is Jaime Gonzalez, and I'm the Houston Healthy Cities Programs Director. I work for the Nature Conservancy, and I've been involved with the Texas Children Nature Movement since 2009, when we tried to get the legislature to pass Children in Nature legislation, and then served on the writing team for the first strategic plan, and have been working with Becky and other people on the Houston movement for many years now. And like Becky, I'm on the Resilient Schools Communities Task Force for the Houston Connecting Children with Nature plan. So very excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelsey Scherschel. I'm with the City of San Antonio Parks and Recreation Department. I manage our natural area properties and also oversee our outdoor education programs.
Excellent. Kelsey, Becky, Melody, Jaime, thank you for taking the time today in your busy schedules and to provide us some insights on the CCCN initiative in your city. So we know that this is, as I mentioned, this is city leadership, but also paired with collaboratives. So in all three of your cities, you happen to have a Children in Nature collaborative that helped to lead the way. So share with us a little bit of how this momentum, this interaction between the city and community grew, and how you built public will and city leadership to launch this initiative in your city. How about Melody? Austin was one of our pilot cities 6 years ago. If you'll tee us off on that.
Sure. Yeah, it's hard to believe it's been that long already. But as Monica mentioned, Austin has a regional TCIN collaborative known as the Children in Nature Collaborative of Austin. And because that group has been in existence for a little bit over a decade, you know, there's a lot of groundwork that had already been laid within the city itself, kind of bringing together a lot of our environmental nonprofits, different city departments, et cetera. And so, you know, I think that Austin was really fortunate in those early efforts of our CCCN initiative, that we didn't have to kind of make the case of why it was important to connect children to nature. All of that work had kind of already been done, both through the efforts of CINCA, but also through AISD and the work of the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee, different city departments in ways that they were already kind of connecting children to nature. And so because of that, it was a little bit easier for us to kind of come in and then put together an implementation plan that really suited where Austin was at that current time. Since then, we've grown a little bit. My position was initially part-time grant funded, and so I'm actually the third person in this position. And then the city a couple of years ago decided to take the position on full-time, and that's when it was brought under the Parks and Rec Planning Division. So a little bit of change kind of through the years, and we've definitely shifted where, early on, CINCA really spearheaded a lot of those early efforts, especially getting our Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights passed. But once the city was able to kind of take on that burden of the position, things definitely have started to become a lot more integrated within the city itself.
Thanks, Melody. And Becky, you led the Children in Nature Collaborative there in Houston and the application process for Houston to participate. Share with us a little bit more how that kind of early on process went and bringing on convening the different partners that have showed up in Houston.
Thank you. And yes, and Jaime, I'm loving that he gets to come after me a little bit because he was here before me, and he was with me as we started the Texas Children in Nature. He was kind of the one that egged me on to get involved with it. So what really happened was we had the opportunity to apply for the Every Kid in the Park grant through the National Park Foundation. It was through that process of working with Jaime and the rest of the Texas Children in Nature initiative here in Houston that we got the opportunity to figure out what we had in terms of nature to offer to our children. Do they need nature where they are right at school, or can we take them other places? And it was this great working together that led us to be able to work with the Mayor's Office of Education. So in Houston, we actually have Mayor Turner was the first mayor who put together a Mayor's Office of Education. We're a little unique in Houston in that we have 17 school districts. So there's not just one school district to work with. And so having the ability to work with the Mayor's Office of Education through this has been key. Now, like Austin, the first people that we worked with, the person that was with me directly in the application process, we had Mayor's Office, we had City Council people, we had the Parks Department. She literally was in the process of leaving the mayor's office, not telling anybody. So we had that little challenge, but that's okay. Then Brandon came on and he is a fabulous powerhouse. But unfortunately with Brandon and the mayor's office and COVID and things like that. Brandon trusts us and we go back and forth. We still have the mayor's office absolutely behind us. And sometimes he's a little busy for meetings like this, but he is totally with us. And Jaime, I'd like you to explain a little bit more about some of the more recent plans, even since that, that we're combining with in the city of Houston, and why we selected using resilient school communities.
Yeah, sure thing. I'm gonna drop this real quick, but I mean, I think the main shot is that Houston, it's not hard to say that we have endured more disasters than any major city in the country. We've had a historic drought, 400 or 500 year floods, a 30,000 year flood, an Arctic blast, a COVID outbreak. So, and tremendous environmental justice issues. So what we're trying to do is synchronize the city's new resilient plan, which some of us worked on, and the climate plan, which some of us worked on, the Living with Water plan, and cities connecting children with nature and biodiversity objectives that we have into a synchronized system so that we aren't a niche of a niche, but also so that people start to see that connecting kids with nature and doing all the green work that needs to get done is synchronous with what everybody needs to get done to combat climate change, to battle inequity and do all the rest of that stuff. So it needs to live in a context and a constellation of ideas that are bringing forth healthier communities, both human and wild. So I think the mayor has really done a good job as he talks about cities connecting children with nature in tying in resilience, green jobs, other things that might not be as tied to our movement as they have in the past. So we're very excited that it's taking that route. And so, you know, with the resilient schools community, or the Houston, I'm going to mess this up, Becky, because it's been a long day. Anyway, our task force, which is looking at resilient school communities, is looking at all of these things in one place. So not just physical resilience, but also academic resilience and mental health resilience. So anyway, that's kind of what we're trying to do, is we're trying to connect all the dots in one place.
Thank you both. And while we don't have, you've heard his name, Brandon, here from the city, you know, I want to emphasize that mayoral presence that exists in Houston. And one of the first convenings when the mayor brought, we were in person, the mayor helped to convene partners, and there was only over 75 stakeholders that came together. And that was from all sectors, from health sector, from the traditional parks and rec and the outdoors community, but we saw a whole new presence of youth serving organizations, school districts, health sector, and so just emphasizing the power of that leadership that is available in your cities. But we also see cities show up with different strengths, and you know, Kelsey, you all have been an amazing testament to partnerships in your city. Share with us how it came to be, how CCCN came to be in San Antonio.
Yeah, so, the city at the time was really looking at having an equity focus in our planning, and, our director connected with Margaret Lamar of Children in Nature Network, and that's how we learned about the initiative and kind of got connected with it. And, it was really the right time for the city to get involved in this initiative with our equity focus. So we worked with the mayor's office to get their support. In addition, we worked with our Office of Equity to do mapping across the city of health factors, economic factors, racial factors, affecting access to nature, and really, found targeted zip codes. But the key piece of that was to really figure out what approach we were going to take, and what strategies we were going to focus on. We did some brainstorming sessions with our TCIN partners. So TCIN has been really a big help throughout this whole process. They connected us with the various stakeholders, not just nonprofits, but also other government entities. We even had some private entities like REI that have helped out. And so that was huge in getting these stakeholders together to brainstorm, to figure out, what are the needs in the city? What are people excited about? Where can people help? And so through that, we refined, our focus and where we wanted to go with the initiative.
Excellent, thank you. And Kelsey, that hasn't necessarily stayed the same. We know that it's evolved over time. Share with us a little bit how those, what has shifted or adapted over time as you've implemented CCCN.
Yeah, so during these sessions, it became apparent pretty much from the get-go that Nature Smart Libraries was a very popular focus. There was a lot of momentum behind that. We also ended up deciding on 2 other strategies, which was youth leadership and nature enhancements to community centers. But that's a lot to work on, 3 different strategies, and really what took the lead was the Nature Smart Libraries. Because of that partnership that already existed with Texas Children in Nature, and because we had such a support and presence from the libraries, that took off, and we've been going strong with the Nature Smart Libraries initiative strategy since the beginning. Originally, we had looked at, not only doing programming, but also infrastructure changes based on some bond projects that were going on. But a lot of that money was already allocated to certain things within the bond. So infrastructure projects really kind of took a back seat, and the programming took off. So we had our kickoff in September of 2019 at Cortez Library on the south side. We had the mayor's office show up, the local city council office. We had all of our TCIN partners, in addition to various other city departments and state agencies that were there to support this kickoff at the library. And after that, we followed it with a lot of programming. So within the library's allotted time slots they already had for programming, we implemented nature programming with our TCIN partners. And then that was a huge success. We had a lot of participation from the community in those programs. But right as we were looking at launching our second library, COVID hit. And so it seemed like where do we go from here? How do we make this work now that we can't do this programming in person? But I think that's where, once again, the partnership that we had formed really came through, because COVID didn't stop the Nature Smart Libraries programming. We took it virtual. We did grab and go bags. We did story walks. Because when COVID hit, I think it really showed people we're stuck inside. We are having to kind of separate ourselves, but the outdoors are the opportunity we have to get out and see others while still being safe, and kind of just having a refresher from everything that's going on. So we got a lot of interest and input, and it really provided momentum for that strategy to continue.
Yeah, and one of the unique components of Texas is, you mentioned Nature Smart Libraries, and I think all 3 Texas cities right now, San Antonio, Houston, and Austin, have that as as part of their strategies. And Melody, we were talking about like, you know, what started from your original vision and how it's evolved. I know Nature Smart Libraries is one of those recently added components. How else, like, kind of describe for us how that shift from that original vision and what stayed the same and what has kind of moved on?
Yeah, so I mentioned an implementation plan that the city had put together, and there were all these, lofty goals in it. And over the last several years, we've definitely, I think, achieved a lot of those, like passing the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. Similar to what Kelsey was talking about as far as the mapping goes, we did a ton of early efforts just trying to figure out the lay of the land. So what does nature look like within the city of Austin in terms of access, connection to, quality, kind of all of those different metrics, and have really used that information as a guidepost consistently through the years. And so I think as far as what stayed the same, really leaning on our nature equity map in terms of like, where should we be focusing our efforts, that's definitely stayed the same. Green School Parks is one of our strategies. And it has been the only thing that has kind of remained constant as well. Monica, you mentioned Nature Smart Libraries. So Austin now has 5 strategies. So Green School Parks, let's see if I can remember them all. Nature Play, which is physically installing nature play features throughout our park systems. OLE, which is outdoor learning environments, which looks at implementing nature-based play features in early child care centers, so kind of the 0 to 5 group. Youth leadership development, which for us is 14 to 24, and then Nature Smart Libraries. And Nature Smart Libraries is something that there was a lot of discussion around early on. And at the time, the city felt like they just weren't necessarily able to kind of tackle that particular strategy at the time. But prior to COVID, we had started revisiting those conversations. The city staff that's kind of over the Parks and Rec department and the libraries and a few other kind of big groups was really hoping to kind of bring all of those entities together. And I think because there was that like a larger city vision of interdepartmental cooperation and everyone trying to achieve similar goals, it allowed us to revisit that Nature Smart Library conversation. And since then have been able to take that on as our newest strategy, and 5 is plenty. We're going to stop there and try and move them forward.
Absolutely. And for those listening, if you're kind of wondering like, oh my gosh, that's a lot to tackle in West City, keep in mind that, Austin has a full-time dedicated person to this. So what are the kind of some of the levers we see is we know that having dedicated staff makes a difference. And noting that, each of those strategies that Melody just described, Melody, I'm going to speak for a second on behalf of Austin, given it's also my home here, staying intimately connected with the progress is, each of those has a strong partner who is co-leading those efforts. So Green School Parks in Austin co-led with Austin ISD, the outdoor learning focused on early education, part of the OLE initiative across Texas in partnership with Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. I know the youth leadership development, the urban forest department here in Austin, playing an active role with you on that, and other divisions of the parks department. So, I want people to know that this is about collaboration and partnership. And that is, I think, what the strength of TCIN and having this. And then for those of you who are not in Texas, know that there are other nature collaboratives out there that we can tap into. While Austin has been ambitious, so has Houston. So Jaime, Becky, one of you want to speak to kind of how things have started or how things have stayed with the original vision and also shifted?
I'll go first, I guess. Jaime plays the cleanup, but actually it is very exciting. One very interesting relationship that Jaime and I have, other than the fact that I met him as I started into this venture of understanding the nonprofits. I'm a civil engineer, water resources, environmental pollution control. I never even knew nonprofits like this existed. And so I went from not even knowing that we had 125 nonprofits to working with them and understanding their various values. Some of them are absolutely protecting bayous. Some of them are have their own arboretums. each of them actually have, we found at least 37 to 40 plus that also have field trips that apply to TEKS. So where we are challenged in Houston and we look toward Austin, by the way, I do have to give kudos to Austin, not just because it's my hometown, but Austin has so many resources, and I know Monica's going to give them to you, but Austin is on the map everywhere now, and they have templates and forms that they will share with you that you can use. With our 17 school districts, we have gotten involved now. Specifically, we are trying to prove the business case of nature, of taking care of our kids, of getting them out into nature for their happiness, health, and education. We are working directly with one of the largest school architecture firms in both California and Texas, and they had an aha moment, going, "Wow, we need to add nature, real nature, to all our schools going forward." So we are doing early child care, the OLE child care type stuff at public schools now. We're helping them with the design, as well as helping them run an auto case, which is a triple bottom line assessment of using nature as opposed to a pavement or non-nature. So that's kind of how we're going as well. And then we are also still trying to build the value of all the things kids need. The nature smart libraries. Kids need nature, kids need library. Oh my gosh, put those two together. So let's continue building those values. And then Jaime will go on some more of the resilience and other kinds of things we're working on with Texas A&M and some of our complete communities.
Yeah, I mean, what I would add is that, first of all, I don't know if this was mentioned, but the city of Houston fell on 3 strategies. It was nature smart libraries, bringing more access to city parks, and the resilient school communities task force. So we're not trying to do everything under the sun that we could. That being said, I think, what we have here is an opportunity, like Becky was saying, to synchronize and collaborate in a systems thinking sort of way and get out of silos. Because that's, what Becky is saying is absolutely true. It's always been true in the conservation environmental education community. Silos kill everything. And so what we're trying to do is to say, is to not go and speak with decision makers in the city and the county and say, hey, I want you to do something new, and I need your attention over here to get kids involved in nature. We want to say that this is a constellation of ideas that all fit together. And there's a group down in South America that is called 880. And the idea is, if you make a city that's good for 8-year-olds and 80-year-olds, then you have hit the sweet spot. And so I think that as we move forward with all of the things that we're trying to do, including more traditional things in EE and in getting kids connected with nature, I am fully intent, and Becky is too, in terms of just changing paradigms. People don't understand the value. They still don't understand the value. So yes, I think that the project work that we're doing with PBK, we just got fully funded to do a preschool, but like giant nature on a preschool campus, not like little gardens, which there's nothing wrong with those. I put in 1 billion of those myself, but we're going to try to change the dynamic and have public or schoolyards be a piece of real resilience infrastructure. And also to just say, just to use that cross-pollination. So I'll just leave it there. What I will say is that I think that there is an appetite to have this conversation. I'm helping lead something called Conservation Moonshot 2030, which is a process that's bringing a whole bunch of different sectors together to try to figure out what does nature mean in terms of our continued livability as a region. So I think people are really kind of responding to it, but it's a slow burn, and Becky has been really pushing this hard for years and years now. And I think we're just getting to the point where it's starting to make sense. That being said, I think that there's both a case externally to people who don't understand all the true values of nature for kids and other people, but I also think there's equally difficult push amongst the groups that are already working to say, you need to consider other people when you're planning your year, other groups, other individuals, because if you're just planning in isolation, pace of change is too quick for all that. We need to work together in a very much more systematic way.
I mean, I'd like to emphasize that systematic approach. There's some wonderful conversation in the chat box, and one of the questions that comes up when we talk about green school years, one of the questions that comes up is individual school gardens. And so I just want to reiterate that this initiative, that we know that there are many amazing partners out there, installing gardens, volunteer groups, and that in some ways, those gardens are the most resilient thing we see, because no matter when they get overgrown, they come back year after year, right? There is a new advocate, a new parent, or a new teacher that champions it. And the goal of this initiative is to say that parent or that teacher or the principal, that they don't have to work in isolation and have those gardens get overgrown. Through a mechanism of district and city partnership that is building out ways to maintain those spaces, to fund those spaces in those small gardens, but also in adding more features to that, and thinking about those sites as community hubs so that everybody has access to those spaces. And that when the students and the children and the teachers and the families arrive at that location, that they are embraced with ways to engage and interact in that space. And so I just want to touch on that the initiative is operating at that systems level. It doesn't overlook the necessity of programming and that collaboration, but it's adding another layer of collaboration to say we also need to think about the big picture of where this is showing up in our practices, in our big resources, and our the relationships and the way we make things happen, so that those individual campuses are also supported. And I know there's lots of questions about getting involved, and we're going to talk about that in just a minute. Before we do, you've heard a lot about these different strategies that are showing up in the cities, and we want to touch on kind of the wins that we're seeing. So it's about these strategies, but what are these wins as we talk about this systems level change? What are some of the ways that this is showing up for how the city has kind of engaged in a unique way to advance equitable access to nature in each of your cities? How about Melody? You want to start us off on this?
Yeah, sure. So I've mentioned a couple of these already. So our nature equity map, it's not something that just the CCCN initiative and myself uses in our planning. It's also starting to be used by a lot of our other departments and partners. For example, the transportation department is working with a group called Gisalo Foundation to do some bike programming and more equitable access in terms of biking to school. And so they're using the map in those terms. So it's not necessarily directly connected to one of our CCCN strategies, but entirely related to providing that access to nature in an equitable fashion. So I think there's just a lot that can be done if you have a city that's able to put something like that together. And it doesn't just have to sit in a silo. We've talked a lot about that with one entity. It's something that can be used by lots of different departments and organizations. I also mentioned our Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights. One of those, obviously, feel-good piece. Everyone loves to kind of get behind stuff like that. But it's been kind of a galvanizing point for us. And so we have that at all of our schools. We have it hanging up at all of our recreation centers, at all of our libraries. And we just want to kind of constantly provide reminders to folks as they enter those public spaces that this is something that the city of Austin has said we are prioritizing. And everything that we do, should help meet these different rights that children have within the city of Austin. And then again, my position, the fact that it's one of, I think only 3 cities now in CCCN that has a full-time staff member dedicated to this work. And so, we're just really excited to be able to focus solely on that. A lot of other cities have kind of percent time that some staff do, or there are those nonprofit groups that are really kind of leading the way. And that's obviously essential to moving that work forward. But when you're able to house it somewhere, you just have greater resources. We're able to connect with other departments. And the way Houston has been talking a lot about, building on their larger city goals, being housed within the city allows us to do that as well. So how do we connect with our SC23 plan? How do we connect with sustainability, with climate, with all of this different pieces, which is good because we have no funding. And so if we're able to attach ourselves to those larger city goals and strategies, that's how we can then start to look at funding some of our efforts.
Thank you, Melody. And Kelsey, chime in on kind of some of, I know this has led to several different types of accomplishments and kind of progress in San Antonio. Share with us a little more about some of the wins that you see.
Yeah, I think one of our biggest wins kind of goes back to what Jaime was saying about silos and just how destructive that can be, because we've really found that we've created some great collaboration and partnerships with the initiative. So especially with city departments, which, you know, San Antonio is a big city. I think in total we have about 15,000 employees. So there's a lot of departments, there's a lot of siloing. But with the libraries, we've got a very natural partnership that just kind of flows whenever opportunities come up. You know, we're able to work together pretty seamlessly to execute the strategy. And it's not just at the top level either. It goes all the way from the administrators down to the branch librarians and even further. So for instance, you know, one of the librarians did a presentation on the story walks to some school districts, and then the school district started implementing story walks. So even though we didn't collaborate directly with the school districts, we were still able to kind of get this idea out there and have it spread without even having to do a bunch of work on our end, just because of that collaboration. So that's been really great. And it's not just with the libraries, but, you know, TCCN, those partners have been there throughout. And there's somebody we can rely on, you know, if we don't have the staffing because of, you know, hiring freezes due to COVID or whatever, we've got partners to lean on who can help provide programming as well. So just kind of that cross-city collaboration that's really kept the momentum going, and it's become pervasive. So it's not relying on one person to make it happen.
Absolutely. And you know, Jaime, I see you busy in the chat box, so I'm going to go ahead and ping you. Collaboration has been definitely a win in Houston. How else would you describe some of the early wins there?
I think one thing is you know, to other folks' point, you know, connecting with practitioners outside of the city. You know, you can get pretty staid in what you do, and so with the Green Schoolyards cohort and other cohorts through Cities Connecting Children with Nature, that's a community of practice. They're all at different stages of their kind of evolution as a program and as connections. So I think that's been a really wonderful part of this whole journey for us. Also, you know, and Becky and I talk about this all the time, like it has been completely iterative. It has not been formulaic. We got into it and we have discovered some pinch points that we can work on. So I think that just with like anything else, it's like adaptive management. I mean, you get in there, you think you know what you know, and you check it, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, and you try something different. You know, and we're always, well, you know, I think one of the ideas that I put in the chat was, how can we, because none of us have money. Let's just be frank. Every one of us should have a city coordinator that's full-time, right? So it's awesome that those 3 cities have it. So where do we find that leverage? Where do we find that money? You know, and the truth is that, you know, the Biden administration is working on a massive infrastructure bill right now. There's going to be the climate core. There's going to be a lot of money pouring into these cities. What we have to make sure is that we are already at those tables. We already have those relationships to say, this is a component of what you guys need. So as you know, children and nature folks, as environmental education folks, and that kind of thing. And I'm working on some kind of national environmental education stuff where we're trying to tie all these things together. And I think it could work really, really well. And so maybe we don't have to scrape and pinch so much all the time. But it's also a narrative piece. How do you get people jazzed and excited and inspired to do something around a city and civic pride? And so that's why I stuck that national park city in there. London actually did this few years ago. They became a national park city and they're obligated to do certain things. And there's no reason why we couldn't do something like that and slot all the things that we're doing in a green way under that and make it very inspirational. So I think that we're we're constantly trying to innovate, and Becky's real good at a lot of different things, but trying to figure out, like, you know, what's going to move people and what the leverage is. And our whole team is like that. So a lot of test kitchening is what it's going to turn into. And that's all good because you learn.
Absolutely. And I think you're spot on, Jaime, about the dollars flowing into cities. And, you know, you all have named making the case around resilience, around academics, around even, you know, equity that is such a priority, improving health outcomes for our children, academic outcomes. Yep. And justice. Yeah,
justice.
Absolutely. So using, you know, looking to build the case and you know, kind of collaborate for those dollars. And I know that the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences, we named Nature Smart Libraries, they, as part of the new fund COVID stimulus, over, I want to say the numbers like $200 million that'll be distributed to libraries and museums. So opportunities that we can start to think in new ways of where nature connection can show up, right? That it doesn't have to be the traditional spaces where it always has been. And so, you know, relevant to what you were just describing, Jaime, and what the chat box is pulling up, you know, if folks are interested in implementing CCCN in their cities, what are like specifically some of the lessons learned along the way? And Jaime's already started to provide some of this, but some of the sage advice you would provide to help people get started. Kelsey, would you be willing to tee us off here and kind of chime in on what you would name as some of those levers?
Yeah, I think firstly is really trying to get a diverse core team together. So making sure it's not just city employees or just nonprofits, really getting a diverse team from the public sector, from the private sector, from the nonprofit sector, just to really have that diversity and understand different angles that you're working with, different capacities. And then I would say also trying to get your city leadership involved, like the mayor's office. They can really do a lot from a policy perspective and support perspective to push those strategies forward and make sure they really have longevity. And then I would also look at just being very intentional and specific about what capacity you do have. You know, one thing we found during like those brainstorming sessions is there's a lot that needs to be done and people have a lot of ideas, but it really takes thorough work to make these strategies survive and continue and have the impact that we want them to have. So starting with one is okay, and just put your focus where you can and make sure that that's happening, and that's going to have some long-term effect.
Anyone want to build on that?
I'd love to. So diversity is key. Monica, I'm going to do a lot of bragging about the resources at the nationwide Cities Connecting Children to Nature, and they've just been building. We're not as far along as Austin is, but we benefited from having everything that they did that the Nationals put together. So I always like to say, don't start from ground zero. Don't think you're starting from ground zero. When we talk about diversity across departments, National CCCN has this amazing stakeholders flower, and it shows how all the pieces work together, and then it shows how you even track all of your stakeholders, know what their names are, who they're with, and what their roles are, and then bucket them in whether they're with the health or schools or nonprofits or the government. And all of these tools have already been started, so you don't need to start from ground zero. So please make sure you reach out to Monica and Melody especially. You're welcome to reach out to Jaime and I, but we haven't come up with as many things. We've been using their forms, so don't start from scratch. Start from what they've done.
Thank you, Becky. Melody, you've been called on as a resource.
I don't know if I'd go that far, but we have made a lot of mistakes. And so I think, you know, when both San Antonio and Houston first started, you know, this process, we were able to have those direct one-on-one conversations and talk specifically around, you know, challenges that we faced right off the bat. I think for Austin, you know, one of the biggest hurdles that we tackled is that when we first decided to take on Green School Parks as a strategy early on, you know, it's not necessarily just about diversity of sectors, but also making sure you have the right people in the room when you have those discussions. Unfortunately, our Austin ISD was not fully involved in those early conversations. And so we said, yay, Green School Parks, kids are there all the time. We're going to have such a huge impact. But because, you know, the school district was not heavily involved in those conversations, there's obviously been some challenges that we faced in trying to implement Green School Parks as a program and make some of those system-wide changes. You know, fortunately, we've got great counterparts in the school district now that we work very closely with. But, you know, early on, it was not the case. And, you know, it obviously makes things a lot harder when you're not having the conversations with the right people.
Kelsey, any lessons learned that you would kind of flag for folks who might be interested in initiating this type of project and strategy in their city?
I really feel like I need to, you know, reiterate what Melody said, because I think we made the same mistake in the beginning where we had all these plans for nature smart libraries, and then when we were getting ready to implement everything, it was like, oh, right, we probably should involve representatives from libraries to make sure they're on board with this too, you know, and thankfully they collaborated with us great. We did have to shift some things, but it's not just because you need their buy-in, but they have a perspective that you don't have on how things operate, and they can make it a lot easier. So getting those key partners involved at the beginning is really the most important thing.
Absolutely. Jaime led us off on the previous question with some of the lessons learned and advice. Becky, Jaime, anything you would add on?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, the perfection is the enemy of the good, right? So what I would say is, if you're going to try to start something up like this in your community, try to figure out who is already on your team. So surface your team, daylight your team, because they're going to come in lots of different logos and a lot of different flavors. And, you know, you can get pretty out of control with a systems map. Don't. Think about the coalition of the willing. Try to figure out how they're all related in this family tree and do that, because even that's going to be super helpful. But what I wouldn't do, and I've learned this lesson by making more mistakes than I can count, is I wouldn't get busy doing stuff unless you figure out some of that stuff, because you're just going to be spinning your wheels and overworking yourself, and you're not going to get to the desired outcome that you want. You're going to be exhausted. So what I would just say is spend some time mapping out and thinking about who's already doing stuff and finding out where there might be a niche, an opportunity. In my mind, most importantly, where do people share values and want objectives to happen, who can help you and synchronize with you, but maybe they're not working together. That's where you can find some sweet spots.
And I'm going to follow up with, you know, both Melody and Jaime and myself. We've all made mistakes, but it's not a mistake if you learn from it, or it wasn't even necessarily a mistake. It was, we thought it was right at the time and it wasn't. And so you learn and you go on. And if you can learn from Melody or Houston or San Antonio, you might learn that their mistake is actually a bane for you. I mean, it might be wonderful for your town. And then always find somebody who brightens your day and becomes your champion, because this isn't a short race. This is a relay marathon. So, you know, there are times that, you know, I'm exhausted and Jaime takes the baton and runs with it. And then I come back and Jaime's like, great, because I got this other project going on. So always find those people that are really to take the baton and really work together. And don't ever give up, because just think of our kids and think of the future and what you're going to do, what you're leaving the next generation, and every little thing you do is one step forward to making their future brighter.
These are inspiring words, Becky. And adding that, you know, while we're excited to have 18 cities and growing, and I'll share a little bit more about opportunities to engage that we have coming up, you know, this is still new, right? That, I mean, not the Children in Nature movement, but grounding it with city leadership, right? That is a new concept of, you know, how, and that's why we're talking about how we make the case in different ways, because we need to think about what it is that's driving cities and how we support them and bring them as partners to kind of help co-lead this initiative. Sarah, before, or maybe I'll offer, I know my colleague Vera Feeney is on the line. Vera, thank you for joining us. She's doing some research on early childhood, and that's part of, at the national level, we're looking to launch additional cohorts. So we will be looking at a regional state approach. Matt, I know you mentioned that we talked about this at our last Texas, or one of the previous presentations, and pandemic is, we're slowed down, but we, you know, we're very grateful to the JPB Foundation to have funding to launch some new regional state partnerships, of which we hope that, you know, anticipate that Texas will be a part of. And then we're also looking at other cohorts. As I mentioned, my colleague Vera Feeney is researching early childhood, so likely to have a cohort launch for that late this year. An invitation for cities to apply for that to participate, and then even a third strategy that we'll be looking at. The cities that have described their planning process today started with a blank palette of, you know, what strategies to employ. And what we're also realizing, that's wonderful and amazing planning process. We've also realized there's opportunity to kind of kickstart things by naming a strategy early on and engaging the community in a process to better define that strategy. And so that's kind of the approach we're taking moving forward. So those are coming. Matt, I saw in the chat box, you know, hold tight, I promise. It's in the queue, not too much longer. We're moving as quickly as we can on that. But it's also not only at the national level that there are resources. And I did drop a link to the Cities Connecting Children to Nature Resource Hub. And there's some wonderful materials in there around making the case to start building that momentum and that public will that we talked about early on. And then I'd also invite you on that page, there's a link to the Children's Outdoor Bill of Rights, a strategy tool that was created that outlines kind of what it means to build a document like that, or a resource like that in your city that can serve as a galvanizing point also. And I know Melody's mentioned it, and there's other cities throughout the nation that have employed that as an approach. Sarah, you are an amazing resource also at the state level. I want to give you some space to chime in and share some of how the resources that people can tap into, and part of which is simply having you to call and field questions too.
Yeah, I have seen a few questions about, you know, like the one that stood out the most is quietly screaming for help. And I feel you. I have been that person in my region. And, you know, that is where Texas Children in Nature Network really comes into play. We are a statewide organization where our mission is to connect you all and to connect you to the resources that are in your city. We have 8 regional collaboratives across the state, and these regional collaboratives are nonprofits, municipalities, national partners that are coming together to really move the needle forward and getting more kids outdoors. And all 3 of these collaboratives that we're talking today, these 3 cities all started as strong regional collaborative networks, is what kickstarted this whole project for them. And so we have others across the state. They aren't just in Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. We have North Texas, we have the Valley, we have Corpus Christi, Piney Woods, Caprock, DFW. So when I'll be sending out a follow-up email, and I'll put in there stuff about joining a regional collaborative, and please let me know if you're interested in finding who's on your team in your community and who you can lean on to be that person that takes the baton, as Becky said. I am here to connect you with those people. We have lots of resources available on our website as well. Monica and I work really closely together. I work with Kelsey and Becky and Jaime and Melody a lot as well. And so I'm very happy to get you guys connected with anyone that you guys are looking for.
if that feels like a wonderful note, but I want to make sure we get to some of the questions that have surfaced in the chat box.
For it, yeah.
So one of them is about evaluation. And so that's a big topic. We could probably host an entire call around it, conversation around it. But the question really comes to what kind of evaluation techniques have you used to determine if a plan is or is not working? Kind of a quick fire approach to a very big question, if we can do that. Anyone want to take it? And Melody, I might point to you a little bit because I know you've done some evaluation through CCCN, but also in partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. That was really specific to helping understand kind of what's available.
Yeah, so that, you know, I think it goes back to those lessons learned. It's not something that we really thought through in the first couple of years. And then we got in through the work and said, great, it feels like we've done a lot, but how do you really know? And so the CCCN National started to put together some framework around kind of tracking and systems change measurement. And so Austin has really taken the bull by the horns, if you will, with that framework, and have all of our strategies go through that tool and make sure that we're aligning our goals with all of it, so that at the end of the year, we can look back and say, okay, yes, we did this, no, we did that, so that we've got some kind of base metrics for all of that. Specific to Green School Parks, we partnered with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and UT Health to look at the impact of the green infrastructure that was installed at one of our Green School Parks on the health and climate of that surrounding community. And so we're doing some very specific research-based work to see if there's any sort of kind of health outcome and climate outcome to what we're doing. And hopefully that's grant funded. So we're hoping to kind of extend what that could look like on a broader scale as we start to build out the Green School Park initiative itself.
And I dropped in the chat box the CCCN Systems Change Measurement Toolkit, that the framework that Melody talked about, and is looking at outcomes on that systems change. So what are the new partnerships that have been developed, policies that show up, power dynamics, and how that might show up in terms of mayoral engagement, but also youth and resident engagement. So how are we looking at power from the top and the bottom, and making sure that there's opportunities to shift that. So that's a fairly new tool that we have available to start thinking about. And I actually think it's an amazing tool to reflect on at the outset. So Melody mentioned that they maybe had a late start with measurement, but it's a wonderful tool to look at the outset to start thinking about what you might measure. And once again, this is at the system change. There's many layers of evaluation that we could look at, including, you know, children. Our goal is ultimately to improve, you know, the academics, mental, physical health of children. So to look at outcomes at that level, we have other tools, but this focuses at that systems level. We're coming up on the hour, so I might just do a quick round robin. I want to thank each of you for participating, and a quick round robin of just you know, any last takeaway message you would send out there to the community that's listening in here. And we'll go kind of on my screen. It goes Casey. Yeah, oh my gosh, so sorry. Kelsey, Jaime, Melody, and Becky.
Yeah, so just last piece of advice is, if you're excited or interested, I think, you know, there's always going to be other people in your city, other entities that are championing the same thing. So just look at what's out there and connect with them and get moving. And if you need help, reach out to Children in Nature Network, because they've been a great resource and they can get you connected with other people. Same for TCIN.
Jaime, are you skirting your goodbyes?
No, just like adding stuff to the chat. But, you know, I think what I just put in the chat was just make sure to tap into national groups, because because of the way this has evolved, there are communities all over the US who are further along than we are in Texas in terms of making all these connections and doing all this work and how to synchronize all this work. So, you know, my thing would be like network like crazy. Every connection is not going to, you know, do it. But if you want to see what's possible, some cities in the US like Philly and New York and Chicago and LA, they have some really strong work that we can adapt here for our particular cultural and economic context and our equity context.
I think I'm next. Yes. I think I would just say, don't reinvent the wheel. There are cities, not just obviously here in Texas, but across the US that are doing this work right now. And so don't feel like you have to start from scratch. Definitely lean in on all of the resources that we've talked about.
And I'll wrap up with, as a native Texan, born, raised, spent the first 22 years in Austin, the last 25 plus here, and blessed to have lived in New York and California and been to all 50 states. I'm a big cheerleader. I want every single Texas city to have this. We are here to help. We have different nature. Texas is the most ecologically diverse state in the whole probably world, short of an Arctic ice cap. We've got everything. And so El Paso's nature is different from Houston's nature, is different from Austin, and it's all beautiful. It's all Texas. So please, let's see how many Texas cities can become children in nature cities.
Excellent. Wonderful invitation. Thank you all for your time. Everybody listening in, thank you for your time. Melody, Kelsey, Jaime, Becky, thank you for your insights. And Sarah, thank you for hosting these sessions and giving us an opportunity to share kind of experience and hopefully provide some inspiration for others across the state.
Yes, thank you all of you for presenting today. It has been a great learning experience for everyone. Thank you for all of your sage advice. It has been fantastic. And I look forward to hearing from you all at our next convening. Just so you know, our next webinar is going to be on April 7th, and it's going to be the state of K-12 environmental education in Texas. And so I hope to see all of you at that one. So thank you so much.
Can I just poke one more in? On March 27th, this Saturday, for all of you educators, the Nature Conservancy, all the folks in Houston are having a Resilient Schools Summit. So Sarah, I believe you know information on that as well. If y'all want to join in, there's still space available on that webinar that's this coming Saturday for teachers.
I'll make sure I put that in the email that I sent out.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.